Hi everyone, thanks for joining for Influencer Roundtable. My name is Regan Cleminson and I am the founder and CEO of Coastline Creatives. And what we talk about on the show is all things influencer and creator economy. And I'm joined here by three amazing marketers and creators. And I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves. We'll start with you.
I'm Kelly. I am from Detroit, Michigan, also known as Yellow Belly Kelly. And basically, I got started bartending when I was going to college. I worked in the restaurant industry since I was really young. And I just developed a passion for creating cocktails and just flavors in general and coming up with fun combinations of things. And I graduated and kind of moved into digital marketing and social media management. So as I did that, I eventually started getting into photography and would just take pictures of fun drinks I made at home. And people just started encouraging me to post recipes online. So I started my TikTok in, I think, 2019. And I've just been creating ever since.
That's pretty early for TikTok.
Maybe it was like end of 2019, early 2020, something like that. But yeah, been having fun ever since.
I believe that. Josh.
Well, I'm Josh. On social media, I'm Drifter's Joint. I create cocktail recipes. I also do bartending tips. I am located in Napa Valley, California, and I will say that I got started with my social media account and bartending in general around 2020 during the pandemic. Prior to that, I wasn't really working in hospitality. It was a different field, but I always knew I had some sort of creative energy, and I always appreciated bartending, making cocktails, especially traveling and kind of seeing different environments or cocktail bars in different cities, different countries, and what they brought to the space through traditions, cultures. So I started in 2020, and it was just me at home making videos with my phone, taking photos with my phone on cocktail recipes. I was learning on YouTube. And then I invested in a camera, and then I started really just playing around with more high quality photos, learning how to color grade, also doing video work and figuring out how to edit and do different styles of video editing. So I started that, I kind of tailored that and I found kind of my brand and my style. And from there, I just really focused on creating content that resonated with cocktails in a very stylized, cinematic way. And since then, yeah, I've kind of grown and evolved and really just dialed in that style and that space of bartending and cocktails.
I didn't realize it's only been 3 years. Your production quality is so great for just doing it for 3 years.
Yeah.
That's actually wild.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Same with the bartending, like your knowledge and your ability to create good flavors and make things that are drinkable and like really thoughtful riffs. Like again, only 3 years. It's actually really impressive. I didn't realize.
Yeah, it's gone by quick, but I'm always still learning. But I love that I've been able just to channel that energy or that creativity into that space. And always, I think the biggest thing for me is always challenging yourself, right? To figure out, okay, what's next? What can I do different, right? And I think that's what's helped me so far. So,
Lucas.
Yeah, so my name is Lucas. My Instagram handle, social media and all that is the Lucas Assis. And I was a bartender for like 10 years in LA and fell in love with craft spirits in general, craft cocktails, the history and the stories behind them, who made them, where and why, all those things. I've always really been into that. And then tequila was, the first Mexican spirit. And I have an obsessive personality, so when I like something, I really, really have to learn everything that I can about it, and kind of obsessed about reading it and learning about the industry and everything. And that was tequila, and then came agave spirits, and then just Mexican distillates in general. And then, so I really started learning a lot about that. And then pandemic came and both my jobs closed, and I was just like, okay, what do I do now? Just like everybody else in the world, right? So one of the restaurants that I worked at, it was underneath an apartment building. So I had a lot of regulars. They had my phone numbers, they had my schedule, you know, so like
They had
really
your
became
schedule.
friends. They knew what days I would be there, you know. So every given time when I was bartending, like 90% of the bar was regulars at this one place, which was awesome. It just made the job so much easier. And so like when everything was happening, they would just text me and say, hey, we miss you, we want to make sure you're okay, but also like, we miss your cocktails. And one of them asked me if I would make cocktails to go. And during that time, I was like, there's no way the city's gonna like crack down on bartenders trying to make some money, you know, with all this going on. So I was like, you know, yeah, I'll do some cocktails to go. So I started making it just for them. And then it just started becoming something that was growing, like word of mouth. They started telling their friends and then their friends. And then I started putting out a menu every Tuesday on my Instagram. So that kept my creativity and my love for, you know, making cocktails. So I was doing classic recipes and my own recipes and playing around. So they would order a day before and I'll deliver them in LA. And there was no traffic back then, so I can go from one side to the other in like 30 minutes. So that was really, really cool. And it kept me busy for, you know, a couple of months with the pandemic. And then everything just started to change a little bit. And I was like, hey, I don't want to, you know, get in any trouble or anything like that. So I did a hard call and I said, not doing this anymore, but thank you so much for your support. It's been great. Then people started asking me, why don't you teach us how to make those cocktails then? So that was the natural progression. And then me making, I've always liked to do videos and take pictures with my travels and everything. Like I got into bartending because I wanted to travel. So I already had that kind of knowledge on how to make videos and edit. So I started making that and I started seeing this growth. And then I started sharing about what I really love, which was tequila, agave, Mexican culture, Latin American culture in general. And then that's when I saw the growth and how we are here today, really.
Yeah, it's interesting that you started more almost like out of necessity in some way versus like a spark of creativity. Not that that also didn't exist, but it was more of like, how do I sustain myself after being in an industry that was in some ways felt abandoned during that period of time? And then still like making people excited about returning to those experiences afterwards, which I think you do a really good job at.
Thank you, thank you.
So I have a first initial question, and it can just be a one-word answer if you want, or you can elaborate a little bit more if you'd like as well. What term do you prefer to describe yourself? Do you like the term influencer? Do you like creator? Or is it something like educator? Do you have like an inclination of what you like to call yourselves? I'll let you start, Kelly.
Definitely creator. I guess it just feels more natural because that's what I like to do. Like I like to create recipes. I like the actual process of creating content and just all that goes into it, like lighting and kind of like decorating the set and getting creative in a lot of different ways. So I'd say that's what I usually stick with.
Yeah, I would say creator too. I think the term influencer is so overused and oversaturated. For me, when I think about creating content, it does come from a very creative mindset. So the word is what I relate to, but at the same time, when I think about the audience that follows me, I want them to like use my page as a resource where they can ask questions and whatnot. And prior to, you know, with influencers, it's more of like, I feel like that word has more of a disconnect, you know, versus maybe a creator that can relate more to their audience versus what they do. So, yeah.
I think content creator for me too. I think like influencer is a word that it makes sense because we do hold some kind of influence, right? But I think it just got a really bad rep as well, unfortunately. But I do feel more like, I don't know, better when it's a content creator or a creator.
Why, we've talked about this on other roundtables, but I've never asked this question. Why do you think it has a bad rep?
I think just it sounds kind of like egotistical, I guess, being like, oh, I'm an influencer. Like I think people perceive it in just that way sometimes, or it comes off like, I don't know. What do you guys think?
No, I think you're right. There is some people perceive it now as like, oh, egotistical when you say the word. For me, it's more like, you know, back in the early days of social media, influencers or the term influencer was used for, it was different, right? Because you didn't have all these niches creating these different contents. It was like very branded image, like a lot of times, a lot more lifestyle, a lot more travel, right? So I just think it's just when you define both words, right? Content creator versus influencer. Content creator is more grounded in like what more people can relate to. Because even if you don't have a big platform, right, but you're creating content and putting it out there, it's just more relatable to everybody else, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think being from LA, I think,
We get it.
that's all I got to say. Yeah, they ruined the term, I think. You know, and just like we go to like these events now, and we kind of see the people that like really love the influencer name, you know, because it comes with an ego and an attitude with like a don't you know who I am kind of thing in LA. And I think that's where a lot of the bad rap came from like videos that we've seen, you know.
Well, and you're all cocktail creators, so it's a little bit different than what like people typically think of when they hear the term influencer. They think of Alex Earl or I don't know, Victoria Paris. Like those names come to mind and are more readily connected with that versus like, oh, yeah, Lucas Assis is such an influencer. Like I just don't think that's a phrase that would roll off the tongue for anybody. And I think that there's obviously also this trend of like relatability right now, where a lot of influencers who are very much talking to camera, they're sharing their lives versus there's content creators who are creating and developing editorial content and co-branded content in order to share and inspire and educate and even entertain to some extent. And so I think that's kind of the difference, or like that's what I consider the difference to be, because I do think Alex Earl is an influencer. She's not a content creator. She isn't rooted in production. She's rooted in her relatability and her just choosing to share everything. Do you feel like there's a space for relatability in drink content? Or, because I know like for you, for example, you're not in most of your content. You're in some of it. To have some sort of person behind the lens. You two are very much in your content, but because yours is so slickly produced, it's like, is there relatability? Is relatability even something that you want to achieve? I actually like to start there.
Yeah, for me per se, like when I think about it, yes, but I like to, my relatability comes more from like a, kind of like from like a more just entertaining aspect where I'm in my content. Yes, there's like the slick stylized videos and this and that, but I also want to be like a persona where people like can find me like, oh, funny or, you know, humorous or just like, just a chill person that like makes drinks online, but at the same time, I'm present in those videos. So that way, like you can like feel comfortable watching my videos and be like, hey, like, okay, this is great. Like I want to do that. Or that was humorous. I found that funny. A good example was for me, like the Vesper video, right? Where I was like, okay, I'm going to take this cocktail, which is always controversial because of how it's made or whatnot, how Bon wanted it. And then I'll tie myself into the frame and you know, talk about it and kind of adjust it to maybe more of a cocktail that can be sipped on at a more just like regular level and not a very booze forward cocktail, right? So obviously there's always going to be disagreements. People are going to like hate on it. Most people are going to love it.
People argue? Please.
But I think that helps because that opens conversation, you know, whether I respond to the comments or whether people are just going back and forth with each other. But me being in it and kind of just laying that out, it's just fun because it's just like gets everybody kind of talking and get it moving. But yeah, I think for me, it's just more like I want to be relatable, but in my style where I'm just like, I can produce that kind of sleek, entertaining edit, but at the same time, maybe be a little funny, maybe a little, add in a little storytelling. So I've done it in different ways for different pieces of content. And I kind of been testing it out just to see what works better for different audiences. But yeah, I think that's part of, you know, the challenge is.
There's a lot of components to your category of content. There's recipe developments. You can make recipes relatable or approachable. You can, your personal presence can be relatable. The way that you shoot and edit and put your content together can be relatable. You know, are you shooting on an iPhone or are you shooting on a, you know, DSLR or a Red? Well, I don't think anybody's shooting on Reds, thank God. Sometimes, though, based on your edit, you could think maybe. Personally, I don't think Instagram really cares if you're shooting on anything much larger than a DSLR, but it's like at that point, is it even worth it? So the point being, and I think kind of what you were like aiming to get across was like there are aspects that you can make relatable while still maintaining the integrity of your style. And I think by and large, a lot of what you do is like very inspiration driven. And so it's hard to be relatable at the same time while still inspiring people to either get out of their comfort zone with what they're drinking or to dress a certain way like you do have, or like to story tell in a certain way or romanticize like where you're visiting. But Lucas, obviously, like your style of content is, you know, much more relaxed, and it's more like having a conversation. Whether that means you're relatable or not, I don't know, because you still have to maintain a certain level of expertise, and you need to be an authority figure when you're talking about spirits. So what's the gap that you're bridging there, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I think from it, like being relatable is something that I'm constantly thinking about. And I think there's various aspects to that in my content. One of them is like the reviews that I do, right? So because I'm in more in the mezcal and agave world, there's some releases that are like 1,000 bottles or 900 bottles. And because of the platform and everything, I either get it from the brand or, you know, I get access to those things. So when I make the reviews of those bottles, I usually get comments saying, why are you even talking about a bottle that nobody's ever gonna get? You know, like I don't even wanna hear this. So that's something that I kind of try to think about, of like maybe I don't put 3 videos in 1 month of bottles that people are not gonna get. Let's do 1 a month. But I also get a lot of comments saying, look, I'm probably never gonna try that, but I love hearing you just tell me the notes. And then if I ever do have it at a bar or, I don't know, do find it at a store, then I know what it is. So there's that bridge that, you know, you're always gonna get people that are not gonna like it. I like to watch videos that I'm not gonna, you know, I love cars. So I'm gonna watch a video about a $20 million Ferrari in Monterey, but I just wanna see it and, you know, hear about it, not know that I'm probably never gonna buy that car. So, you know, there depends on what people want. And I think for my travel videos too, it's something that I try to make it a little bit more relatable in the sense of like, I know that it's not, you know, it's a privilege to get to travel as much as I do and get to the places that I get to go because of the relationships that I've built within my platform and within the community as well, in Mexico and Brazil and even in Europe or something like that. So I've always tried to like really showcase my life, but then bring it back to somewhere that's relatable. I think for me, it's something that I always think about is like, because my content is so much geared towards Mexico and I go to Mexico about once a month, I really try to refrain from saying, you don't know what tequila is until you go to Mexico and see it being produced. Because I know a lot of people won't have that opportunity. So that's something that I really try to be aware of.
Yeah, I think something that is probably an accurate perception of creators and influencers is that we get access to things that no one else would ever have.
Right.
And obviously there's value in that, and brands want to provide that in order to, you know, strengthen their relationship with that creator, or it's not scalable for them to provide that experience to the general public.
Right.
And so they're using you as a vehicle to share those experiences and storytell in a way that's really compelling. I know, like, I went on a trip many moons ago now, but I still gush about it, with Cloudy Bay. And like there was helicopter tours and staying on the property, and those are things that you just, as an average person not in the industry, you can't really do, not at the level that we did. And I don't feel any guilt about that, but you do have to be thoughtful about how you approach that. And maybe you just say, okay, I'm not going to be relatable today. like that's also okay. Yeah. So going back to your account, because there is, I would say, like a limited personal presence. Do you feel like relatability is something that you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like with the recipes that I create, I aim for approachability and, you know, coming up with recipes that people can easily make at home or actually going to want to make. I think sometimes like it's fun to obviously experiment and kind of find obscure ingredients and things like that, but I want people to basically like just feel comfortable kind of starting creating cocktails and you know, using approachable ingredients that you can almost find anywhere. So I think that's kind of like my style, or at least what I aim to do, is create stuff that is still fun, but that a lot of people feel like they can, achieve and make.
Do you feel like that achieving relatability then manifests itself in your comment section or your DMs? Do you get a lot of questions?
Sometimes, yeah. Like, I think, like, what kind of questions do you mean?
Or like, what is a dry shake? Or how do I make clear ice? Or what's the difference between a London dry gin and a botanical gin? Like, do you get those types of questions?
Yeah, some of them, definitely. Like, definitely about the ice and, certain techniques and stuff. And I try to, I feel like, answer them the best I can. But I think a lot of the methods I use or the videos I show I try to keep it simple as much as possible. So
creating a safe space for people to experiment where they don't feel like they have to go out and buy 4 different things in order to achieve something.
Right.
And I know, like Lucas, on your side, sometimes you'll be like, okay, this is a cocktail, or you're gonna look at the ingredients list and roll your eyes. But people wanna see it.
Yeah.
And so at that point, it's like you're almost achieving relatability by acknowledging how unrelatable this particular thing might be as well. All right, kind of switching gears a little bit. I'd like to chat about what your least favorite thing to do is as a creator. There's a lot of things like unique experiences that we get to have that are wonderful, trying bottles that nobody else will be able to try. But then there's all these other things that people forget that we also have to do. If you had to pick one thing that you would either just never have to do again or like offload to somebody, what would it be?
It's hard to pick one thing.
I think I can say my least favorite was always negotiating, which is awesome now because I have you to do most of that, which is awesome. So I'd say that was my least favorite. Now I think it's just dealing with all the changes of like algorithms and having to be aware of that. And then like if a video gets taken down, who do I contact? Like that whole part of the business is something that I don't like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Josh?
For me, it's probably all like the technical stuff, all like the compliance that you have to do with brand partnerships, right? So captions, hashtags, and then everything that comes to like, because it's alcohol, right? Using like the age gating and all that. And it's like, especially with Instagram, right? It's like one of those things where it's like, okay, like I have to triple check this because if something goes wrong, this gets taken down, and then it's a whole ordeal.
Yes.
So I think that whole side of things is always a little stressful for me, because I'm always second guessing. It's like, okay, did I do that? Did I do that? Even after I'm posting. So yeah, that's probably my least favorite thing for sure.
We appreciate compliance, but man, you guys have to go through a lot of steps in alcohol specifically. What about you, Kelly?
I'd say pretty much the same thing like I said, like just things are constantly changing on social media, and I feel like you are kind of always walking on eggshells and things get, taken down kind of often. Just with alcohol, you have to be very careful about how you set everything up. So I think there's a lot of pressure in that sense for like branded content. And just, I guess, the admin work and like emailing, like you're just always answering emails and on top of like the video production aspect of it and coming up with recipes and cleaning up. Oh wait, no, cleaning up is my the least favorite part, hands down. I take back everything I said. Cleaning up after is my least favorite part.
For reference, for folks who are watching, we have these houses where we have you guys here for 5 or 6 days. We hire a cleaner. It is so many dishes, so much glassware that needs to be hand washed and polished. And these are like little things that brands don't really think about when they're like, oh yeah, we're going to employ you to do this thing. And it's like, yeah, there's also an hour of dishes at the end of it. I also feel for foodie creators who like go through the same level, if not more. But
so much.
I will say though, there's like more sticky things like citrus and syrups and all that stuff. Like I just have to imagine it kind of gets all over the place.
It's just time consuming. Like I'm like, I could have shot like 3 more videos if I didn't have to clean up. Yeah.
One thing that I hear, kind of going back to the admin topic, is taxes. Paying quarterly taxes, filing in April. I feel like, as somebody who oversees a large group of influencers or creators, there's not a lot of standardization or information that we've received from professionals that has helped to inform how to, I would say, like, most successfully file. And there's questions of, what are you allowed to expense? Like, is your whole life online? And then are you allowed to expense your entire life because it's online? Do you feel, A, this is a two-part question, do you work with like a CPA or a tax professional, or, and if not, B, where do you receive information to make informed decisions on, how you claim? We'll start with you, Kelly.
Okay. I do work with a CPA, but still I feel like, just being self-employed, you have to stay on top of so many things, by yourself throughout the year. So I use QuickBooks to kind of keep track of everything, like transactions and invoices and...
Shout out QuickBooks.
Shout out QuickBooks. That really does help with everything, and kind of gives you estimates of what to expect. So that has helped me a lot just with staying organized. But yeah, it is hard because I don't feel like there's many people out there who are going to just give you all of the advice of what to do and how to handle taxes and what to write off. I think my rule of thumb is, if it's justified and if it's helping me with work, write it off. But I think also, like, this is such a new career, and we're still figuring out kind of what we can do and what we can't do. And yeah, I don't know.
Disclaimer, none of this qualifies as financial advice. We are not fiduciaries. Please do not take any of this as gospel. This is just what works for us. Compliance and things. Josh, what about you? I know, like, the other day you said we had had a conversation about taxes, and you're like, I just called my tax guy.
Yeah. First of all, school system failed us for not teaching us taxes. But when it comes to the space of taxes, right, I think for me, like when I'm thinking about it and the conversation we had, is that when I started creating content, I was the long-term goal was to do it full-time. That was always a long-term goal. And then it came to a point where, okay, now that's looking like that's a possibility. So how do I kind of put that all in order, especially when it comes to taxes? Now, I think for me, especially when it comes to trying to figure all that out, what's helped me is, and this is the beauty about creation, is finding people that talk about that, like actual people, especially on TikTok, where you get people that are professionals at it and they break down taxes for you at a level that you can understand. It's just so useful, because for me, I'm like a visual learner, so I need to see how one thing relates to the other. So that's helped a lot, especially with me kind of getting my creative content into like an actual business. And then for any taxes, anything, I'm always researching on Google or on other social media platforms to see what's the best way to expense, what's the best way to invest or reinvest my money somewhere else, so I can avoid taxes. Legally, obviously, right? But so using a CPA or kind of investing, money to outsource some of that to a professional, I think is so helpful too, because not only does it educate you in case you want to, take that on yourself over time, but it just helps you get everything in order, so that way you're not hit with like a fee or a fine or audited, but.
In addition to looking towards people who are resources for it on social media, do you talk amongst yourselves about taxes at all as creators?
I don't know. I don't think I've had that conversation with other creators. Definitely open to it though, because I always like to know what other people are doing. For me, like I have spoken to others that for myself, I have my content under an LLC, and I've heard other creators do the same thing for tax reasons, right? And we've shared that kind of back and forth. But yeah, like I'm always willing to learn what others are doing because it's great to figure that out.
So this is not legal advice, but LLCs are really more there to protect you from a liability perspective, especially when we're considering the contracts that you are agreeing to and working in the alcohol space specifically. There is always an opportunity for a windfall of legal and holding yourself only accountable to what your business is doing versus like your personal assets is important. And so an LLC is not also important for a tax reason, but it's very much important from a legal perspective. I would say that's more of a priority for why we make that recommendation to the creators that we work with. And obviously it's a priority for us. Like if I was just a sole proprietorship and I didn't have an LLC, and I look at indemnification clauses in all of the contracts that we execute on behalf of the creators that we work with, my liability and exposure would be in the millions. And that's really scary. So an LLC is something to consider and talk with your legal counsel. But also I do think it's, helpful to talk amongst your peers.
Yeah.
Right.
We've talked previously on this series about pay transparency and having conversations about what you're making, but I think it's also important to be like, what business decisions are you making that don't relate to the rate that you're charging, that are also helping set you apart and set you up for success as a creator? Lucas, do you have any thoughts to add? I know we're pretty comprehensive about it, but I want to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, so I do use a CPA, but I do think that there isn't a lot of content or like ways for you to get information on how to do taxes. For me, coming from bartending, where I was dealing with 80% cash, to coming now to like not having any cash and just like how do you work all that out and how the taxes work, like that was a real struggle for us in the beginning of how to deal with. And thankfully the CPA that we work with is also part of our family, so we could like ask these questions. But I know that a lot of people don't have that, as you know. But I think for me, especially in sharing with other creators, has been such a big help. I think also because living in LA, you are more exposed to this influencer culture marketing. So we do have a group of friends. It's like 10 of us now that we're all in the creative field. So, I do more cocktails. There are other people there that do cocktails as well. And there's some guys that do lifestyle and fashion. And we try to get together once in a while. And we go to a lot of the same events because we're all in the same space. And some brands are seeing that we're all hanging out. So they're like inviting all of us. But it's really cool because when I'm in town, we get to sit down and talk and either vent or like ask these questions. So I was new and they've been doing it for, years. So it's like, hey, what can I claim? Who do you guys do your taxes with? So do you guys pay quarterly or do you pay once a year? Like all those questions, and especially with like even pricing, like in the beginning of what should I charge, has been such a big help. And I think that's one thing that's in this industry, people have this like protective thing about their prices. And I feel like if you share all this, we all make more money.
Oh, yeah.
So.
And we've harped on that in some of our previous episodes for sure. And it still remains true.
Yeah.
Just having those conversations remain important. And also, I think there's so much room for everybody to be successful. I think even in a really focused space like being a drinks or a beverage creator, you're like, oh, well, if they're gonna go with that person, they won't pick me. Sometimes that's the case, but as an agency that represents over 10 creators in the space, there's room for all of you. And depending on like what your niche is or how you talk about brands, like that's going to be the difference maker. It's not because like one person made an old fashioned and you made an old fashioned 3 days later. Like that's actually not going to make a difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think what I want to add to that too is that back before, when it came to content creation, I feel like there was a lot more gatekeeping in terms of what is a creator making, right? How are they making it? Like how much? And so, entering the space, new, and you're kind of figuring out, okay, like as you build your audience, how do I charge? What am I making? Like, how does that all play into that role, right? And it's like, it's so much of a help to understand like what other people have been doing or what they're charging or what their rates are, because it's like you kind of want like everybody to be successful. You want everybody to win. and again, it's not a competition. Everybody has their own way of doing things, right? So, but it's nice to kind of like have those open conversations, I think.
Right.
Well, I think gatekeeping comes from a place of fear. Like if I give somebody this knowledge that I have, like they're all of a sudden going to be taking work from me. And I think I've been in this game long enough, too long? No, just long enough to know that that's not the case.
Right.
And for us, an exchange of information just internally amongst talent managers and being able to receive information from you and kind of collate all of that and look at it from a really data-driven perspective has then allowed us to give you really good advice. Because we'll be like, oh yeah, 4 other people are dealing with that particular issue, or yeah, that one agency has become somewhat problematic for everybody, and how do we, address that in a way that is a thoughtful approach and benefiting everybody and mutually agreeable. So we kind of implement that at scale as an agency, and I think having a bunch of people in the same category makes it a little bit easier because as you see a lot of the same faces, a lot of the same names in your inbox. We'll put it that way.
Yeah.
Speaking about kind of making decisions from a place of fear, I want to switch gears just a little bit. It's currently October, and we're in the midst of another pretty big news cycle around a global crisis. We've had a lot of these since 2020, and there's been moments where I think collectively, as creators and people in this industry, we've decided to pause and take time away and give people space to consume information that's relevant to those global events. But on the other side of it, there's something that's kind of come up a lot where understanding what your responsibility is as a creator who you're not a news anchor, you're not an activist, and global events are not something that you talk about. Do you have a responsibility to maintain your work as an opportunity for people to escape and see something that isn't related to those things that maybe benefits their mental health, to unplug and watch something that's entertaining or educational? And so I guess the question that I want to pose is, how do you feel in general about pausing during these moments? And Kelly, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think it's all like a personal decision, and at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself what your intentions are, like when you're sharing things or reposting things. And I think, if your intention is to, maintain a certain level of face or like how you're presented to people versus if your intention is purely because you care about what's going on and you're having an emotional reaction to it. But I think at the end of the day, you shouldn't feel pressured to post something on, your story or your page if it doesn't feel like genuine to you. I don't know. What do you guys?
Yeah, I think the same.
Yeah.
I think what you said is very true, right? It's just like there is no obligation to do that when it comes to the space of the content we create, right? I see like each one of our pages as a place where people kind of flock to for entertainment, for educational purposes, things like that. And they already do that. People already do that with our niche or other niches in kind of maybe that same space, or even like movies or music, to escape what's already happening on the day-to-day basis, right? Given that we're in the midst of a certain crisis that's happening across the world, and today, this year, last few years, there's always something happening, right? Like it's almost like every other day something's happening where it's just like, okay, like what do we do in these situations? So for me, it's more like, I personally feel like I want to be considerate, but I also want to make sure that my page doesn't derive from what I do, because I just want to continue to provide that genuine content people want to see, and that's why they follow, right? And when it comes to actual crises and things, yeah, like if I want to support, I feel that supporting it in my own way, in a more kind of quiet, kind of private setting, for me personally, that makes it more worthwhile. Yeah, and then, yeah.
What about you, Lucas?
Yeah, I do agree that there shouldn't be this pressure or, this demand for you to speak out with whatever problem was happening in the world. And it's like that meme that said, I'm so tired of living through historical events, and there's that fatigue of like, there's so much happening in the last 4 years that people are coming into our content maybe to escape from all that, and they don't want to hear what's going on. And so for me, it's very personal. So I don't want to be somebody that just reshares a story because everybody is. And I think I'm very, very aware of not sharing misinformation, making sure that anything that I'm sharing is true. There is some fact checked, and I think there's so much happening now that people are just hitting share without even reading what's going on, Or it's like those, the carousel that has a bunch of different messages, and they just read that first one just to hook you, share that, but they don't read the rest, I saw that last night when I went to sleep, and I was reading somebody's repost, So I think there's a lot of that, and I think it's just this, you reshare it, you announced it, oh, then I'm good. That's all I got to do. So what are you doing in the background? I think for me, it's my page, right? So like, I'm going to share things that are really, one, I think it really speaks to me, and two, is that I'm educated on. So I've shared a lot of political stuff, and usually not polarizing political stuff on my page, but like just bringing awareness of like immigration, like we talked about before, or those kinds of things. And I think what's happening now, it's horrible. And of course, I have a lot of Jewish friends that are in LA, and I feel for them. I can't imagine, and some of them have family there, and it's a tough situation all around. It's just bad in all sorts of ways. But it's like, what voice do I have? What does my voice really do in this? Or can I support, can I learn more about what's happening on my own time and do those things internally rather than have to just reshare? So is me resharing that story meaning that like, oh yes, Lucas did it, but you don't see the background of like me trying to educate myself on this, or looking at resources, or seeing how I can actually help, not just what's happening now, but whatever else is happening in the world.
There is this question of, and this is not something that we need to answer, it's just more of, I think something that sits in the back of my mind is, what is the value of resharing that? Is the value to me to know that I've checked a box and now I'm off people's hit list of people who haven't said anything? Right. Or is it because what I'm sharing is contributing to the conversation in a thoughtful way? I would say, by and large, from the amount of content that I consume on the internet as somebody in my position, I feel like it's a lot of the former, and it feels disingenuous. And I think that's the one thing as creators, that it's like, we have our trust with our followers. That is our bank. And that's what we're living off of in a lot of ways. And so if we fuck with that, then what is that going to mean for, our relationship with our audience moving forward? And I think as well, there's this culture of accountability specifically for creators and influencers that doesn't exist for other people and organizations who are doing the exact same thing. When we were talking about this a little bit last night, I used the example, no one's really holding Bon Appetit magazine accountable for making a statement on these global events. I don't see it. And if it is happening, it's happening at a very small scale. And I do think lifestyle creators or people who are just more on the influencer side of things are probably the ones who are most under pressure to provide commentary on it. And maybe in your space, we're not seeing it as much, but I think there is this kind of culture where we're seeing other people who have large followings doing these things. And there's a sense of obligation to have some standardization within the community around what's the right thing to do in this circumstance. The other thing that I brought up last night was there are opportunities there are instances where brands do pause. And I'm actually really happy when an agency or a brand takes the lead on making that decision. I'm also very happy to initiate that conversation on behalf of a creator if they feel uncomfortable talking about something during a specific crisis. However, there comes a point where if you can't publish anything on your page for 2 weeks and this is your primary source of income, like at what point are you sacrificing your well-being and your livelihood in order to adhere to this like culture of accountability? Is that something that has concerned you ever? Have you ever hit a point where you're like, well, I can't work for a period of time now? And what do you think we can do to maybe have more meaningful conversations with those brands and agencies about like, I understand you wanting to do this, however, it's now impacting how I support myself?
So as a cocktail recipe content creator, I don't often deal with brands asking me to pause for specific periods of time. That's not something I'm super familiar with, but thinking about how other creators might have to deal with that, I think it all depends on what's going on and what the brand's intentions are and what standpoint they're coming at you with, and just setting boundaries that make sense for you as a creator, whether that be readjusting the timeline or working out payments so that your work doesn't have to, stop and be affected by this. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I'm with her on that. I think it's definitely, if you set those boundaries, set those limits, and allow the brand to know where you're coming from as well, and find like maybe a middle ground when it comes to these areas, then I think that's super important. Because you don't want to create the work, do the work, and then, or even sign something, and it's like, okay, I have this ready to roll, and then all of a sudden it's wiped out, right? So I think that's very important, that transparency, so the brand knows where you're coming from too.
Because I don't know, I can't think of many other industries that like things halt when something like this is happening. Like if you're a bartender, you still got to show up for your shift,
Right.
which whether that's good or bad, we could. That's a conversation for a different day.
Sure. I mean, I think I want to say probably for most industries, right? The world continues to move, right? I mean, there are going to be those very large crisis events, but like if they're located in certain areas of the world, right, the rest of the world kind of just continues to move and work around that, and that's just how it is. I mean, if you come to a halt, then you're losing money, you're losing business. Most I think industries don't favor that, that kind of, yeah.
I think for me it's like a really case by case issue. It really all depends. I think if there's a contract and this is our livelihood and we need to get paid for the work that we've done, there's a conversation of there. It's like, okay, how long do you want to pause it for? When is it, like we just talked about, can the payment still be paid when we thought about it? Because, I have my life, I have my budgets and all those things. That's a great point. But I think it's just a case by case. I also haven't had this happen, but, it's weird. Like, let's say I was working with another company right now. Totally understand if they're like, hey, we know we signed this contract, we have a 6-month deal with you, but we're not gonna be able to do it. I'm not gonna be like, no, you have to, because we have a contract, So it just depends. I think it's a really case by case that I'd be open to talk to the brand about if they needed to.
What I believe I'm hearing in a really succinct way is that there is a mutual sense of responsibility between brands, agencies, and creators, but that it exists on a bit of a sliding scale based on like what your niche is and what you talk about. Because I think we hold certain types of creators, whether they be travel creators or creators who are based in certain places, to a different standard based on maybe what the issues are that are happening at any given time. I think that's fair. And that means we do have a little bit of a sense of responsibility to drive the conversation with those brands and agencies if and when it does come up. And you can make decisions on what it is that you do and do not want to talk about. I think the argument that potentially the general public might have is that because you have a platform, you have an obligation. And so I want to quickly touch on that idea. Versus talking about the brand and agency side of things where they're making decisions more holistically as it relates to their business. Do you think that expectation from your followers is fair? And if so, to what extent?
I think it all depends on what type of creator you are. And what you value and how you use your platform. Like I think as a cocktail recipe content creator, I don't feel like there's as much pressure as maybe like you were saying, like a travel influencer or a lifestyle influencer, somebody who's always kind of on camera. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it has to be something that's personal to you and a personal choice. And just kind of like Lucas was saying last night too, like he feels like it's more meaningful to, you know, stand for causes that he really believes in and to talk about those things, like, you know, you were saying immigration and stuff like that. Stuff that hits close to home and feels more genuine and authentic to you and your audience.
Do you have, if somebody were to reach out to you, if a follower were to send you a DM and say, hey, I'm really disappointed you're not talking about this, do you have an idea of how you would respond?
That really hasn't happened to me yet, but I would definitely like reflect on it. It means a lot to me that I, you know, have people in my community who follow me and like what I do, and it would be something that I would take into consideration and moving forward. And I think it's a case-by-case basis too, like what's happening in the world, and if I feel like what I'm going to, like if I'm going to add value by saying something on my story or making a post about that, or, you know, create a positive impact in some way. Just being genuine above all else is really important in how you deal with just the crises happening in the world. So,
Josh.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't think I've had that, like, people ask me that personal questions about that in the DMs. If they did, I definitely, you know, would respond in the most neutral way possible, you know, and just let them know that my platform, I don't feel that my platform is meant to speak on those things, and that, you know, I do take those things in consideration. And obviously, I don't have a problem having a conversation with the person back to back via DMs. I've had conversations about other things with people in the DMs, but at the end of the day, if we can find some neutral ground and, you know, they can understand where I'm coming from, but I can also be considerate of where they're coming from, that's all I want, is to make sure, you know, and that way it's just one of those things where, like, okay, like, I get where you're coming from, and it's something more of an understanding. And I think that's just, you know, that's what counts at the end of the day. Yeah.
Lucas.
Yeah, I've had a couple of DMs, not about necessarily what's happening now, but I remember when the U.S. was withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, I had a couple of people actually DM me, and one guy said, hey, love your content, been following you forever, really like to learn everything that you do. I would love for you to make a pomegranate cocktail for what's happening in Afghanistan. So then I messaged him back and was like, hey man, I think that'd actually be pretty insensitive, using alcohol to make this cocktail with everything that's happening now. But let's talk about it. And we had a really cool conversation. And he understood that it wasn't something that should be posted. And yeah, it ended up being a really cool interaction with them, and getting to learn, and, you know, what was happening. Like, I knew what was happening, but getting to more of that, like, personal perception of what was happening with what he was telling me. I feel like that's the only time that I can think of that somebody asked me to really comment on something. But I have commented on certain things, and I've had people message me saying, I'm unfollowing you.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, that's fine. If it's something that I truly believe in, it's okay. If you unfollow me, I totally get that you don't want to hear this, but I want to say it. And this is, at the end of the day, my platform. So
Yeah.
I'm
You're
gonna
allowed to
share
do
about
what
it.
you want with it.
Right.
And you're allowed to not do what you want with
Right,
it.
exactly. There shouldn't be pressure anyway.
I think, there's pressure kind of both ways.
Both
if you
sides,
post
yeah.
something and if you don't post something.
Exactly.
So it just all has to be what makes the most sense for you. And like you said, kind of just communicating with your followers and, like, being respectful and trying to find a neutral ground.
Yeah. I think for me, I don't have platforms as big as all of you, but it's not small either. And I had an audience like pre-COVID. And so there were some other things that happened during that period of time where it was really important to comment on it. But it was like our first instance of like feeling that culture permeate through everybody who had an audience versus just like people who are in specific niches. And I kind of look back on what I published and talked about, and I'm proud that I did say certain things. But other things, I'm like, did that feel performative? And was I doing that because I wanted to genuinely have a conversation about something, or was it because I felt like it was important to me to have a voice in general? And the reality is we don't need to contribute to every conversation. That's like kind of a hard pill, I think, for some people to swallow, but I think that requires a little bit of self-awareness. And when you do then acknowledge, I actually don't need to talk about that. There are plenty of other people who are incredibly more qualified to talk about these things, and I'd much rather consume what they have to say and share versus contribute something that might actually take away from what I'm trying to accomplish over time. Well, I appreciate you chatting about this more difficult subject to round out the end of our conversation. And thank you so much for joining. Normally we have cocktails, believe it or not, when we're working with cocktail creators, but it's a little early in the morning. But I think we can cheers our mugs.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers to AM combos.
I know, pre-caffeine, mid-caffeine
Pre-caffeine
conversations.
combos. That's the name of it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation as well. I hope you found it valuable in some way, shape, or form. And if you did, please share it with your friends, your colleagues, and we'll see you next time.